Ms. Arya, the frozen sperm your husband stored in the hospital was taken away 5 years ago and donated to Ms. Isabel. Didn't your husband tell you? Hearing that name, Arya's smiling face froze instantly. She thought she had misheard and asked again, unwilling to believe it. Could there have been a mistake? My husband's name is Julian. The doctor typed on the keyboard several more times and, after confirming everything was correct, said, "There's no mistake, Mr. Julian even sent a banner to the hospital when Ms. Isabel's child was born." Hearing the doctor's words, Arya's hand, which was holding onto the wheelchair, slipped weakly. Her mind was buzzing. 5 years ago, she and Julian had just gotten married. When they got married, Julian said he didn't want her to suffer the pain of childbirth, so he voluntarily got a vasectomy. Arya was incredibly moved. But she was still afraid he would regret it, so she repeatedly persuaded him to freeze his sperm at the hospital before the vasectomy, to leave a way out for the future. Recently, Julian had been mentioning children in front of her. She thought he regretted his decision, so she came to the hospital secretly, planning to surprise him by getting pregnant. But she didn't expect him to give her a surprise first. The name Isabel sent a chill down her spine. Isabel was Julian's childhood neighbor. Julian had secretly loved her for 15 years. When he learned she was going abroad, he prepared a grand confession, but was rejected. Arya was the one who accompanied Julian through that low point, warming him with her sunshine-like personality, and then they got married. Arya thought he had really fallen in love with her, and had let go of Isabel. But now she realized that he had never let go of Isabel. She was just a self-deceiving joke. Seeing her face turn pale instantly, the doctor asked her a few worried questions. Arya forced a smile, saying she was fine, and controlled the wheelchair back home. She entered the house distractedly, thinking no one was home, but she heard the sound of glasses clinking from the balcony. "Julian, are you really going to get a divorce? Arya has been with you for 5 years. Don't you have any love for her at all?" Julian's lazy voice sounded. "Isabel needed me to get married back then to stabilize her marriage. Now that Isabel doesn't need it anymore, I don't want to delay Arya any longer. I only married her because I felt guilty. Does Arya know that you and Isabel have a child? She loves you so much. She definitely won't agree to a divorce. If you really divorce, I think she will definitely turn around and leave, and you won't be able to find her. You'll regret it." Julian laughed dismissively. "She doesn't need to know about the child. The other day I told her that the company was in crisis, and we might have to get a fake divorce for a while. Once she's used to it, I'll tell her the truth. She'll understand. Besides, with her legs like that, where can she go?" Hearing his words, Arya's mind went blank. A fake divorce? She thought he was really in trouble, and even took out her hidden dowry to give to him. But she didn't expect that it was all a lie. Arya's throat tightened, and her heart ached like it was being pricked by needles. She was still planning a future with children with him, planning how to surprise him on their wedding anniversary. But he had already excluded her from his life, summarizing her 10 years of unrequited love and 5 years of marriage with a single word: guilt. She thought she had finally gotten her wish, but she was just a part of their love affair. Looking at her temporarily paralyzed legs, remembering the pain she suffered to save him, she only felt incredibly stupid. Arya frantically pounded her legs, tears falling uncontrollably onto her thighs. The sounds on the balcony stopped instantly. Arya froze, unsure how to face them, and turned the wheelchair back towards the door. A moment later, Julian came over, a look of surprise in his eyes, his gentle words overly attentive. "Arya, when did you get back? Why didn't you ask me to pick you up? What did the doctor say?" Arya looked at his eyes, which were full of love, and her eyes couldn't help but turn red again. Julian panicked immediately, reaching out to wipe her tears. "What's wrong?" "It's okay. If they can't be healed, I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." Arya stared at him intently, wanting to see if there was even a hint of love in his eyes, but ultimately she didn't dare to look all the way, and shifted her gaze helplessly. She sniffled, and while turning the wheelchair, asked casually, "Julian, I want to have a child with you. It's a good thing we froze your sperm at the hospital. When are you free to go with me to take a look?" Julian's face changed immediately. He remained silent, superficially changed the topic. Why are you suddenly talking about this? I don't want you to suffer. It will break my heart. Besides, didn't we agree to travel around the world? How can we travel with a child? Seeing the hint of discomfort he revealed, Arya closed her eyes, knowing the answer in her heart. She said dejectedly that she was tired and asked Julian to carry her back to the room. After he left, Arya picked up her phone. "Aunt, I've made up my mind. I want to go to the Netherlands with you." A surprised voice came from the other end, but before she could rejoice for long, her aunt asked, "How long are you staying this time? Don't just stay for 2 days, and then say you want to go home to be with your husband." Arya's heart constricted. She opened her lips slightly, permanently. Her aunt was stunned for a moment, but she didn't ask much. She just happily said that she would help her with immigration right away. After hanging up, Arya called a lawyer and asked about divorce. She finally understood that her enthusiasm couldn't warm his heart. Since he wanted a real divorce, she would give him what he wanted. Having decided to leave him completely, Arya found a lawyer the next day to sort out her assets. It started to rain heavily on the way home. She didn't ask the driver to take her today. She took a taxi. This coffee shop was already relatively remote, and now with the heavy rain, there were very few passing vehicles. Arya's originally anxious heart was extinguished by the rain. She thought it would be nice to watch the rain under the eaves and wait for it to stop. So she refused the owner's offer to accompany her, and watched her close the door and go home. But the rain lasted for a long time, continuing until dark, and still showed no signs of stopping. Arya's legs also began to ache faintly, so she called Julian. "Julian, can you come pick me up?" Knowing that Arya was trapped in the rain, Julian was anxious. He left without saying much, wanting to pick her up himself. Hearing the anxiety in his voice, Arya felt a warmth in her heart. Two thoughts were fighting in her mind. Maybe he wasn't completely without love for her. Could she give him another chance? Just as Julian hung up the phone, he received a text message. "Julian, I'm back." Julian had just turned off the street when he was shocked by this message. The next second, after sending a message to the driver, he turned the car around, stepped on the accelerator, and sped towards the airport. Under the rain, Arya was filled with thoughts of how to tell Julian about her fears and thoughts when she saw him in a while. But she didn't expect that until the night was deep, the heavy rain turned into a drizzle, and the water had reached the bottom of the wheelchair. Julian still hadn't come. Arya's heart slowly calmed down, until it sank to the bottom. She took out her phone again and dialed his number, but no one answered. Finally, it connected, but a woman's voice came through. "Julian, don't you really like me anymore?" There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by Julian's restrained voice. "Isabel, I'm already married. But you still came to pick me up, didn't you? Then tell me, why did you abandon your wife who is 5 kilometers away, to pick me up, who is 30 kilometers away?" Hearing their conversation, Arya's breathing stopped, and she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. She opened her mouth several times, but couldn't make a sound. Her throat was just aching. She was so afraid to hear Julian's answer that she hurriedly tried to hang up, but she accidentally pressed the speakerphone. Julian's hoarse and powerless voice came out. "Yes, I just can't forget you. Are you satisfied?" Arya was completely stunned, as if she had been sentenced to death. There were also sounds of kissing on the other end. She quickly pressed the hang-up button. Unbeknownst to her, the phone fell into the rain with her trembling hand. Arya came back to her senses and tried to pick it up, but forgot about her newly disabled legs and fell into the rain. The rain hit her densely, and she suddenly lost her strength and cried out in the rain. Julian had secretly loved Isabel for 15 years, and she had followed him for 15 years. This 5-year marriage was like a bubble, and the moment it burst, it reminded her that it was time to wake up from the dream. Why? Why? Arya murmured over and over again, her heart colder than the autumn rain, freezing her as if she had fallen into an endless abyss. She didn't know when she passed out. When she woke up, she was already in the hospital. She stared blankly for a while, looked at the time, and realized that it was already noon the next day. The phone was undamaged after drying overnight, but it was still silent, with no messages. She was just about to get up to complete the discharge procedures when the door was opened. She turned her head restrainedly, but her eyes dimmed the next moment. "Madam, Mr. Julian's car got stuck last night, so he asked me to pick you up. How are you feeling now? The clumsy excuse made Aria's heart sour, but she didn't want to embarrass the driver and didn't expose the lie. I'm fine now. Let's check out. After receiving the order, the driver quickly completed the discharge procedures and took Aria home. After arriving home, Aria stopped at the door for a long time, tidied up her emotions, and squeezed out an ugly smile before pushing the door open. As soon as she pushed it open, a voice came from inside the door. Julian, look how much Caleb looks like you. Aria, who was turning her wheelchair, stopped abruptly at the entryway, hesitant to move forward. However, Julian's voice still reached her ears. Isabel, I don't want to hear such things again, especially when Aria is around. Isabel's smile instantly froze, and she smoothed her hair behind her ear, agreeing. Aria, however, was completely frozen at the door, turning her head to escape, only to bump into the shoe cabinet in a panic. The room fell silent, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps, and Julian appeared before Aria, holding someone in his arms. Aria looked up and couldn't help but agree with Isabel. They really did look alike. Julian saw the redness in Aria's eyes, and his heart skipped a beat. He quickly put Caleb down and knelt in front of Aria, taking her hand. What's wrong, Aria? My car broke down last night, so I asked the driver to pick you up. Where did you go? Why did he bring you back so late? If he can't do his job well, I'll have to find someone else. His words of concern stabbed Aria once again. She gave a self-deprecating smile, mocking him for not even coordinating his excuse with the driver in advance. She thought she had long accepted everything and wouldn't feel hurt anymore, but unexpectedly, her heart still ached. She turned her head, wiped away the tears from the corner of her eyes, and forced a smile. Why bother with a driver? I went to see a friend. Julian finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as you went to see a friend. When did you come in? I didn't hear you at all. Hearing his words, Aria understood. All the previous concern was just a setup. He only wanted to know if she had heard something she shouldn't have. Aria instantly turned cold, pulling her hand away and calmly saying, I just came in. I didn't hear anything. Julian's smile instantly froze, and he awkwardly grasped the empty space where her hand had been, saying nothing more. Aria shifted her gaze to behind him, and Julian stood up to introduce. Aria, Isabel just returned from abroad and has nowhere to live. She's also become my mom's attending physician, so I'm letting her stay here temporarily. Don't misunderstand. Seeing his complete protectiveness, the last glimmer of hope in Aria's heart died out. She withdrew her gaze, clenched her hands, and tried to appear as dignified as possible. Okay, I understand. I'm tired. I want to rest first. Julian was startled by her calmness, a strange feeling rising within him, but he didn't delve into it, assuming she was just tired, and went to push her towards the master bedroom. Aria interrupted him. I want to go back to my own room. Hearing her words, Julian stopped in his tracks. Just as Aria was wondering why Julian had stopped, Isabel walked forward holding the child's hand. She pointed to a bedroom door and said, Are you talking about that room? That used to be my room in Julian's house. I'm used to sleeping there, so Julian just let me move in. She called him Julian so intimately, but Aria heard the provocation in her words. She turned her head in a daze to look at Julian, hoping for a word of protection from him, but there was none. It's just a room. If Isabel wants to live there, I'll give it to her. Aria, if you want, I'll clean up a guest room for you. Hearing his words, Aria closed her eyes, a surge of grievance almost overwhelming her. That room was personally decorated and furnished by Julian when they first got married, specifically for her, because he knew her parents had passed away early, and she had no maiden home to return to. He told her to treat that room as her haven. If he made her angry and didn't realize it, all she had to do was move in, and he would know. But now he had forgotten the meaning of that room. Even saying it was just a room. She pressed her hand to her chest, suppressing the suffocating pain, and said stubbornly with her neck craned, No, I want that room. As soon as the words fell, the atmosphere became heavy. Julian also frowned, wondering what Aria was being so temperamental about for just a room. Just as he was about to speak, Caleb ran towards them. He waved his arms and ran to Aria, hitting her legs and face repeatedly. Bad person. Bad auntie, don't bully my mommy. That's my mommy's room. The child's strength was focused and painful. Aria's legs were sore from being hit, and just as she was about to push him away, he grabbed her hair, causing her a sharp pain, and she instinctively grabbed his wrist. Unexpectedly, he screamed first, his crying echoing throughout the large villa. Mommy, my hand hurts. The bad person is bullying me, wah. Aria was still recovering from the pain in her scalp, physiological tears filling her eyes. She looked at Julian reflexively and saw him looking at Caleb with worry. She followed his gaze and noticed that Caleb's wrist was bleeding, and her heart leaped in shock. Isabel also hugged Caleb, crying with heartache. Just as Aria was still stunned, Julian's reprimand came. Aria, Caleb is just a child. Why are you bothering with him? I already said Isabel is only staying temporarily. Can you stop dwelling on the past? It's just a room. Do you have to oppose Isabel? Aria was increasingly silenced by his blatant bias. She restrained her emotions and opened her mouth. Julian. Before she could finish speaking, Julian interrupted. Don't say anything. It's not up to you to make decisions about this house. I've decided to give her that room. Even if you're angry, you shouldn't make trouble with a child. You've disappointed me too much. Reflect on yourself. After speaking, he carried Caleb out the door, his face filled with the nervous concern of a loving father. Isabel followed behind him. As Isabel passed by her, she flashed a smile, which Aria caught. She suddenly understood everything. Her face still bore the red marks from Caleb's beating. Seeing them as a family of three, she alone was the outsider. Her tears immediately fell uncontrollably, and even her breathing became erratic, making it hard for her to breathe. Aria cried for who knows how long, crying herself to sleep, only to be awakened by a phone ringing. She answered the phone, and her aunt's clear voice came from the other end. Aria, the immigration procedures will be finalized in a week at most. Are you serious about this time? Don't lie to your aunt. Your aunt hasn't seen you in a long time. Aria gave a wry smile. I'm serious. I might be bothering you for the rest of my life. There was a moment of silence on the other end before she spoke again. What about Julian? Did you two divorce? Aria gave a muffled and her aunt felt extremely sorry, but she knew that comforting her wouldn't help. She became unusually enthusiastic. Then hurry up and pack your things. In another week, your aunt will come pick you up. You don't have to bring anything. Holland has everything. She heard the comfort in her aunt's words, and her heart finally felt a little less dull pain. After hanging up the phone, she looked around the room and realized there really wasn't much to take. Since Isabel wanted the room, then she could have it, along with Julian. That night, she found a clean guest room and curled up in bed, quickly falling asleep. She didn't know how long she had been asleep when a clear sound of glass breaking woke Aria up. She followed the sound and found that it came from the master bedroom. She wondered what glass items there were in the master bedroom. As she approached the door, she suddenly felt a jolt of fear and quickened her pace. As soon as she entered, her eyes widened. What are you doing? The room was littered with broken glass. The wedding photo that should have been hanging on the wall was now tattered. Caleb was happily stomping on her face in the photo, muttering vulgar language as he stomped. Isabel looked over with a provocative expression, not taking Aria seriously. She turned her head and instructed her son. Caleb, do you still want a daddy? If you do what mommy told you to do. Caleb obediently said and then picked up a lighter, igniting the diary in his other hand. Aria's pupils shrank and she shouted loudly, Don't! She rushed to stop him, desperately turning her wheelchair, but Caleb seemed to be teasing her, running around so she couldn't catch him. Aria was sweating anxiously. When she finally caught up, the diary was nothing but ashes. Aria carefully picked up the only remaining corner, unable to stop herself from sobbing. That was her parents' only memento, a diary that recorded their short lives. She glimpsed her parents' lives through those words, gaining a little comfort in her lonely teens. After marrying Julian, she brought it to this house. She originally wanted to lock it in the closet, but Julian said that with him around, no one would dare touch it. But he didn't keep his word, and now he allowed others to break in and burn the only item she had to remember her parents. She clenched the piece of paper, no larger than half her palm, and looked at Isabel with bloodshot eyes. Isabel, is this how you teach your child? Destroying other people's belongings without their permission? Have you ever taught him what manners are? But Isabel, who had been looking so smug, now had red eyes. Caleb has never had a father since he was little. I raised him alone. You can say whatever you want about me, but Caleb is still young. Are you going too far by saying that to him? I'll apologize to you, okay? Arya frowned as she looked at her, suddenly sensing a gaze. She turned her head and saw Julian with a dark face. She was stunned for a moment. Julian had already approached. Arya, he's just a child. Why do you have to bother with him again and again? Isabel even conceded and gave you the room. Are you only satisfied if you drive them out? Arya looked at the impatience on his face, and her heart ached. She held up the remaining scrap of paper, trying hard to suppress her sobs. Julian, do you know what he did? Before she could finish speaking, Julian raised his hand and knocked the piece of paper away, his eyes filled with annoyance. So what if he burned a notebook? What boy at this age isn't mischievous? Do you have to make such a big deal out of it and keep harping on it? If you want it, I'll buy you 100, 1,000. Is that enough? Arya watched the paper flutter to the ground, where Isabel stepped on it. She suddenly gave up. She gave a powerless laugh and leaned back weakly in her wheelchair. Enough. I'm sorry. It was my fault. Julian, who was still burning with anger, was stabbed in the heart by her wounded expression. Arya didn't look at him, just staring blankly out the window, but he seemed to see a trace of shattering in her dead eyes. Remorse filled his heart. He was just about to comfort her when Caleb interrupted. Uncle Julian, can I play with this? Caleb was holding a gift box. Julian assumed it was empty and told him he could play with it if he wanted. Arya knew what was inside, however, and quickly said, No, you can't. Julian, who had just felt a little guilty, frowned again at Arya's words. It's just an old box. Can't you be so petty, Arya? Is there anything he does that you approve of? Arya's heart skipped a beat at his words. She looked at his eyes in disbelief, realizing he really did forget what was in the box. Her outstretched hand froze in midair. After a long pause, she still wanted to mention the ring, but Caleb interrupted her. Uncle Julian, I want this box. Can I throw away what's inside? Julian was currently annoyed with Arya, finding her unreasonable, and was naturally accommodating to Caleb. Sure, throw it away if you want. Arya saw Caleb take out the ring, and her heart couldn't help but tremble. She wanted to take it back. Caleb, however, lifted his foot and walked to the fireplace. He paused just before throwing it in and turned to ask Isabel. Mom, this ring is quite pretty. Do you really want to throw it away? Isabel's face changed. She didn't dare look at Julian and desperately blinked at her son, signaling him to throw it away. Julian heard there was a ring inside, and was also shocked. He quickly looked over, but the ring had already been thrown into the fireplace and engulfed by the flames. He immediately looked at Arya, opening his mouth several times but not knowing what to say. He only felt an inexplicable emptiness in his heart from Arya's gaze. Arya didn't look at him. After a moment of silence, she turned her wheelchair towards the fireplace, reaching out to try and retrieve the ring. The fireplace had just been lit, and the fire wasn't big, but it was still hot enough to make Arya hiss in pain. Julian felt a pang in his heart. He stepped forward to pull her back, but Isabel moved first, walking in front of Arya. She lightly hit Caleb a few times, then looked at Arya with tearful eyes. I'm sorry. It's all my fault for not disciplining the child. I apologize to you on behalf of the child. Tell me how much the ring cost, and I'll save up and buy you a replacement. Arya stared blankly at the hypocritical Isabel, saying nothing. Isabel glanced at Julian out of the corner of her eye, and saw that his eyes were still on Arya. A hint of ruthlessness flashed in her eyes. The next second, she knelt on the ground with a thud. It's all my fault. Please forgive me, Arya. If you're really angry, then hit me. With that, she forcibly grabbed Arya's hand and slapped her own face with it. Arya couldn't break free. A clear slapping sound rang out, and Isabel's face immediately turned red. Not satisfied with this, she released Arya's hand and started slapping herself repeatedly, saying I'm sorry with each slap. Arya frowned at this spectacle. Just as she was about to tell her to stop acting, Julian pushed Isabel away. The wheelchair wasn't locked, and the forceful push sent it sliding straight into the desk behind her. The back of the chair hit the corner of the desk, and Arya fell sideways onto the floor. Julian hadn't expected himself to be so strong. His eyes widened in shock. He took a couple of steps forward, but Isabel grabbed him. He turned and saw Isabel's swollen face. In the end, he hardened his expression, only pulling Isabel into his arms protectively. Then, he glared at Arya coldly. Arya, Isabel has already apologized to you. Why are you still being so unreasonable? It's just a ring. Did you have to go and pick it up to embarrass Isabel? Arya lay awkwardly on her side on the floor, her burned hand hitting the floor, causing her to momentarily lose her voice in pain. The numbness in her legs left her lying on the ground like a cripple. She propped herself up a few times but ultimately fell back down. The feeling of helplessness made her eyes redden in an instant. Julian's heart twinged. He was about to help her up when Caleb grabbed his hand. Uncle Julian, it's all my fault. Caleb was wrong. Holding Caleb's small hand, Julian's heart softened, and he hardened his heart towards Arya once more. Since you enjoy making things difficult for others so much, get up yourself. I'll see how tough you can be. Arya watched Julian step on the torn wedding photo, as if he was stepping on her heart, leaving her with no hope. She didn't want to love him anymore. Not even a little. Arya lay on the ground for a long time before finally struggling back into her wheelchair. The once cozy bedroom was now a mess, but Julian didn't seem to see it, only remembering her unreasonable behavior. Arya chuckled lightly, as if mocking herself. The next second, she dialed her lawyer's number. How much longer will the process take? Attorney Miles was pleasantly surprised and quickly said, I was just about to call you. The process is almost complete, and I've drafted the agreement. Let me know when you're free, and I'll send it over to you. Arya unconsciously dug her nails into her palm. It turned out that their 5-year marriage could be completely over in less than 5 days. She suppressed a trace of lingering affection in her heart, and told the lawyer to send it over tonight. Unexpectedly, just after it arrived, she was called away by Julian to attend a family banquet before she even had a chance to read it. Julian's family didn't like Arya, and Arya rarely attended family banquets. She didn't know why Julian insisted on calling her this time. She finally understood why on the way to the banquet. Arya, Caleb is just a child and likes to move around. I'll hold him and sit here. You don't mind, right? The special fixed seat in the back seat that was once reserved for Arya was now occupied by Isabel, and next to her sat Julian. She didn't even glance at Julian, but after a moment of silence she said, I don't mind. You can sit there. Julian was surprised by her attitude, surprised that she didn't pester him. He got out of the car, wanting to help her into the car. Arya, however, endured the pain of her burns and used all her strength to lift herself into the passenger seat. Julian hurriedly went to help her fold up the wheelchair, but Arya subtly avoided his hand and quickly folded it up herself. Julian looked at his hands, which had repeatedly failed to help, and felt a sense of loss in his heart. But the next moment he felt like he had been embarrassed and hardened his expression again. The car drove on, and Arya remained silent in the front, forming a stark contrast to the friendly family atmosphere in the back. After listening for a long time, she finally learned that it was Isabel who had suggested bringing her to the family banquet. With the good intention of improving their relationship, but Julian clearly knew that she and Julian's family had never gotten along. Yet, just because of Isabel's words, he had gone without hesitation to do it. She saw the gentle look on Julian's face through the rearview mirror, and felt a pang of bitterness in her heart. So that's what he was like when he loved someone, not a feigned gentleness, but a natural affection. Arya self-abused herself by looking for a long time until her face was wet with tears. She snapped back to reality and realized that tears were streaming down her face without her even realizing it. She quickly turned to look out the window, closed her eyes, and pretended to sleep, allowing the tears to slowly dry in the wind. This time, Julian's family banquet was still the same as always. Those who usually came, and those who didn't all returned for the banquet. The large and small family filled 5 tables, and Arya only recognized a few familiar faces. She originally just wanted to be a quail and endure it this time, but Isabel mentioned her several times. I've been living abroad for a long time, and I only found out that Julian was married when I came back. Let's all raise a glass to her and thank her for taking care of Julian for the past 5 years. Isabel had grown up with Julian, and the people at the table were even more familiar with her than Arya. So even though they didn't really like Arya, they still raised their glasses at Isabel's suggestion. Arya felt like she was facing a formidable enemy. Even the smile was forced. She raised her glass and drank it all as a sign of respect. Her alcohol tolerance was never good, and her face turned pale after drinking it. But Isabel didn't plan to let her off so easily. That won't do. So many people are toasting you. How can you only drink one glass? You agree, right, Julian? Julian looked at Arya's cold face and grunted heavily. It's not often that you come here. Who are you giving that face to? If you dislike Julian's family so much, then why did you marry me in the first place? Arya was stunned by his words. He was the one who proposed in the first place. The next second she laughed. What was the point of arguing about these things now? They were getting divorced anyway. She was about to say that she wouldn't stay any longer when Isabel stood up and supported her wheelchair. Arya has difficulty moving around. Let me help her. I'll make sure she toasts everyone properly, right, Arya? Arya opened her mouth to refuse, but Julian directly agreed for her. Arya, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. The words that Arya had been brewing in her mouth were immediately swallowed back. Facing the mocking gazes of Julian's family, she ultimately didn't refuse. Isabel pushed her, toasting each table and each person, even making her bow down to the younger generation. Every time she hadn't even finished swallowing, Isabel would hand her another glass of wine. Arya felt her stomach burning, and her bladder was also swollen. She interrupted Isabel several times, whispering that she wanted to go to the toilet, but Isabel ignored her, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Finally, after finishing the toasting, Arya was pushed back next to Julian, her head spinning terribly. She hadn't even sat down for a second before turning her wheelchair, wanting to go to the toilet, but she found that the wheelchair was stuck and wouldn't move at all. She glanced at Isabel, who was chatting and drinking with people, and her eyes became a little gloomy. Arya took a breath and patted Julian on the shoulder. He immediately looked over with a questioning look, but before Arya could speak, Isabel walked over with a wine glass. Julian, there are a lot of people I don't recognize. Can you quickly introduce me to them? With that, she pulled Julian to another table. By this time, the family banquet was half over, and there were only a few people left at the table. Everyone had gone to catch up. Everyone who passed by Arya was called away by Isabel with various excuses. Arya now understood everything, but there was nothing she could do. Perhaps she had drunk too much wine. She gave up on calling for help and leaned back in her chair with a headache, not even realizing that she couldn't hold it in. It was Caleb who shouted loudly, "EW, what smells so bad? Ah, it's this bad anti-peeing. How shameful." Arya was awakened by the sound, and all sorts of people gathered around, the contempt and ridicule in their eyes undisguised. Arya moved her body and felt the wetness beneath her. She paused for a moment, and a wave of humiliation washed over her. She buried her head low, but her clenched hands and trembling eyelashes showed her helplessness. Those kids had no sense of propriety, their laughter stabbing at her ears. Arya gripped the wheels of her wheelchair tightly, desperately trying to turn and escape, but the wheelchair wouldn't budge. She grew increasingly anxious, trying to avoid their direct gazes, but their eyes were everywhere. Arya used her hands to push herself up, but as soon as her necrotic legs touched the ground, she slid down like a pile of mud. Fortunately, someone caught her before she fell completely. Arya didn't care who it was. She clung desperately to their shoulders, her voice filled with helplessness and panic. "Take me away. Please take me away." The person didn't say a word, but scooped Arya up and carried her to the employee break room before leaving. Arya looked at the change of clothes the person had left on her lap, and her tears instantly burst forth, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Just as her sobs echoed in the narrow room, the door was kicked open. Julian stormed in, his face livid. "Arya, I didn't know you already had a new lover. Where is he? Tell me, who is it? You're cheating on me before we're even divorced. You're really something." Arya was so startled by the force of the door that she forgot to cry, and when she heard Julian's words, her eyes were filled with disbelief. She had just been so vulnerable, so humiliated, that a kind employee had helped her to avoid further embarrassment. And yet he thought this of her. How could he think that of her? He knew about those 15 years. How could he think this? Aria's heart was already numb, and her eyes no longer held any pretense of calm, only unconcealed disappointment and anger. Julian, you accuse me of cheating without even asking, you know, Isabel. Before she could finish, Julian leaned close, his face filled with rage. Even now you're bringing up Isabel? Did Isabel tell you to sneak off with another man at the family dinner? Aria looked at him, unable to believe that she had loved him for 15 years. She clenched the clothes in her hands, closed her eyes, and nodded in resignation. Yes, I found another man, let's get a divorce. The veins on Julian's hand, braced beside her, bulged instantly. He nodded furiously. You said it, don't regret it. Aria took a few deep breaths to suppress the lump in her throat, and took out the bag she always carried with her. No regrets, never any regrets, sign it. Julian looked at the divorce agreement she held out, and felt a pang of panic. But the next moment he decided Aria was just playing hard to get, trying to compete with Isabel, so he snatched it away. After looking at it for a few seconds he scoffed, the words notarized division of property, fueling his rage. Without looking closely at what was being divided, he signed his name decisively, as if to prove that he didn't care at all. Then he threw it at Aria, paced back and forth a few times, and opened the door. See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. Aria didn't say anything, and Julian assumed she agreed. Only Aria knew that there would be no tomorrow. She was leaving with her aunt tonight. A piece of paper no longer mattered. Aria didn't even go home. She changed her clothes and was taken to the airport by her aunt. On the way to the airport, she blocked all of Julian's contact information, only sending one last-time text message. Julian, if my love makes you feel guilty, then I take it back. Fortunately, the child is yours and Isabel's. Otherwise I wouldn't have the heart to leave. Thank you for the 15 years you were in my life. Wish me happiness, and let's never meet again. Furious, Julian stormed back to the banquet hall, grabbed Isabel by the arm and dragged her home. He threw her roughly on the bed and forcefully climbed on top of her. As if wanting to compare her with Aria, he was not the only one she could find. Isabel was startled by Julian's actions for a moment, but within a second she realized Julian's intentions, so she actively put her arms around his shoulders. Julian. Julian, who was burying his face in her neck, came to his senses when he heard the voice. He sat up and looked at the door, as if waiting for someone, but after a long time, the door didn't open. He deflated instantly, ran a hand through his hair, and released Isabel. Isabel, who had already taken off half of her clothes, was stunned on the sofa, thinking that Julian was just drunk and not in the mood. She chuckled and reached out to touch his chest. Julian, let me help you. Her hand moved downwards, but Julian wasn't stirred in the slightest. He was lost in thought when he was suddenly pulled back to reality by a sharp pain. He widened his eyes when he saw the hand below him and immediately got up. Isabel. I'm married. He pulled up his pants and gave Isabel a rare dark look. Isabel had been rejected twice and was furious, no longer bothering to feign gentleness. But you don't love her. Besides, aren't you getting divorced? Julian frowned when he heard her words and immediately retorted. Who told you we were getting divorced? Isabel immediately shifted her eyes guiltily, and put on a flirtatious smile again, wrapping her arms around his waist. I guess, Julian, you obviously have feelings for me, why reject me? Julian's face turned livid at her actions, and he pushed her away. Isabel. I said I can't let go of you, but only if you hadn't gone abroad. I'm only helping you because of Mr. But don't cross my line. Isabel, having been pushed away again, lost all semblance of good temper, pushed open the door and left. Julian instinctively wanted to chase after her, but he glanced at the time, and then at the empty bedroom, and stopped. He tossed and turned all night, never hearing the sound of that door opening again. Julian felt a wave of frustration. He knew he should send Isabel a message to ask where she was, but his mind was full of how Aria still hadn't returned. Even though the divorce had been in his plans for a long time, he suddenly felt a bit reluctant. He attributed this to withdrawal symptoms, and finally fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, only to be awakened by a nightmare. In the dream, he saw Aria marry another man and have children with him. Julian woke up covered in sweat, not feeling the expected relief, but only anger. He looked at the empty house and realized that Arya hadn't come back all night, a hint of panic suddenly rising in his heart. He felt that something was wrong, but he glanced at the time and didn't think too deeply about it. At 10 o'clock in the morning, he arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau on time, took a number, and sat in his car waiting for Arya to appear. But number after number was called. Until the sun began to set, Julian still hadn't seen Arya. Yet this didn't annoy him, but instead made his gloomy heart a little brighter. As the Civil Affairs Bureau closed, he threw away the last number he had taken, smiled, and turned the steering wheel to go home. He knew that Arya was reluctant to divorce him. She had been so fierce last night, he had thought she was finally standing up for herself. He drove with one hand and cheerfully took out his phone to call Arya. He intended to forgive her this time. As long as she didn't see that man again, he wouldn't hold it against her. Julian had completely forgotten his previous plans to get a divorce, and was only waiting to hear that familiar voice. But when he called, he found that he had been blacklisted. A trace of doubt flashed in his heart, but then he immediately understood. Arya was definitely shy and didn't know how to face him. Julian simply didn't call again, intending to wait for her at home. Anyway, she couldn't stay away forever. But when he got home, he found the driver, who was on leave today, standing anxiously at the door. As soon as Julian got out of the car, the driver rushed up to him, carrying a large pile of things in his hand. Julian was confused by these familiar items, but before he could speak, the driver spoke. Mr. Julian, something happened to Miss Arya. Driver Chen was an old man, and tears welled up as he said those words. But Julian's face was dark. If you can't speak properly, then you don't need to work. Chen was always perceptive, but today he didn't shut up and leave as usual. Instead, he wiped away his tears and continued to speak. He took out the things in his hand to show Julian. I went out to drop off my kids today and found a pile of things piled up at the door. I saw they were Ms. Arya's and used daily necessities. And then I found a schedule inside. Ms. Arya is going to the Netherlands. Julian was annoyed by his sobbing, but it was just going to the Netherlands. It wasn't like she wasn't coming back. If she gives you something, then keep it properly. Are these little things worth crying over? It's not like she's not coming back. Chen knew that Mr. Julian had misunderstood him, but he choked up and couldn't say anything. Seeing Julian raise his foot to leave, he finally calmed down and said, that plane crashed. At the same time Miss Arya was supposed to leave. Julian, who had just touched the doorknob, froze instantly and turned around in shock. What did you say? He grabbed Chen by the collar, making Chen's face turn red. If you dare talk nonsense again, I guarantee you won't be able to survive in Shenzhen. Chen stood on tiptoes, taking out something from his pocket. I'm not talking nonsense. This is... Before he could finish, Julian snatched the paper, and his pupils contracted when he saw the familiar handwriting. He stumbled, and the paper fell to the ground. Impossible. Impossible. What if she wasn't on that plane? I think you really don't want to work anymore. Ever since Chen became his driver, he had been deeply cared for by Ms. Arya and knew of Arya's love, so even at the risk of being fired, he still spoke up. I thought so too at first, but I checked last night's flights and found there was only one to the Netherlands. I was even thinking, what if Ms. Arya didn't leave? I waited at the door early this morning and found she hadn't returned and her phone. I can't get through. Julian suddenly remembered the phone that was always unreachable, and a wave of fear washed over him. He shook his head, his eyes bloodshot. Impossible. I don't believe it. It can't be. Arya made plans with me yesterday to meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau. How could she go to the Netherlands without a word? Chen was surprised at Julian's reaction. He had thought Mr. Julian didn't love Ms. Arya, especially after Ms. Isabel came back. He didn't even pretend to care about Ms. Arya. But seeing him struggling to get into the car, pulling at the door several times without opening it, he realized he was wrong. Chen drove Julian to the airport like a whirlwind. All the way, Julian's heart kept sinking, his mind filled with Arya's tears from yesterday. He kept praying that Arya was all right, constantly refreshing the news on his phone. The plane crash was being hotly discussed all over the internet, and he was only seeing it now. Seeing the news that none of the crew or passengers survived, His heart ached and his hand trembled as he swiped the phone. Julian closed his eyes, clutching the phone, and tears dripped onto the screen. He suddenly remembered that Arya had once set up location sharing for him. He quickly opened it, but found that the location had disappeared, as if the person had never existed. Arriving at the airport, he froze in the hall. The broadcast was announcing the list of victims, and the last name was shockingly Arya. In that instant, Julian seemed to lose all his senses, unable to feel any sound around him. His feet were numb and rooted to the spot, unable to move forward. Many people were crowded in the hall, but everything was frozen in his eyes. His ears could only hear Arya in the broadcast, his eyes could only see that familiar name on the big screen. Julian didn't know how long he stood there, then suddenly woke up as if from a nightmare, breathing heavily with his chest heaving. He turned to leave, but his legs felt numb, and he stumbled and fell to the ground. Chin quickly helped him up, but he had become like a pile of mud, unable to be moved no matter how hard Chin tried. Julian was oblivious to everything around him. He only knew that his heart was aching so much he could hardly breathe, and his head was hurting as if he was being electrocuted. Arya, he murmured unconsciously, but no one responded. Julian instantly recognized the reality. The repeated broadcasts were like a sharp knife, slicing him apart piece by piece. He suddenly slammed his fist on the floor twice, and finally got up. Chin looked at the zombie-like Julian, and the tears he had just dried flowed again. He quickly stepped forward to support Julian, and took him back to the car. On the way back, Julian was silent, staring out the window without blinking. When he got home, he reverted to his original state, calmly telling the driver to go home. Before leaving, Chin took a few more looks at him, making sure he was really okay before turning and leaving. But as soon as Julian entered the house, seeing everything familiar, he couldn't hold back any longer. A flood of sadness poured into his heart, making him unable to maintain his composure. He leaned helplessly against the sofa, covering his red eyes with his arm. Unless you looked closely, you wouldn't notice his gradually damp sleeves. Isabel, who had been waiting at home for a long time, had not noticed. She had sent the children away and waited for a long time in sexy lingerie, finally waiting for him to return. Julian heard the noise from the bedroom, jumped up in an instant, but didn't dare to go over, only staring at the door. When he saw the door open a crack, his breathing became heavy. He had a vague expectation and fear in his heart, but the door stopped. He waited for a long time, finally mustered the courage to push open the door. But his heart turned gray when he saw the person in the bed. Isabel didn't see his red eyes. She only believed that Julian definitely had feelings for her, and that she had to seize the opportunity. So she tiptoed, step by step, towards Julian. When Julian saw the familiar bed but not the familiar person, his face immediately turned cold. When Isabel's hand touched him, he roared. "Enough! Isabel, didn't I tell you I'm married? If you insist on this, then I'll help you find a new house." Isabel froze at his words, her face flushed with anger, but she didn't dare to lash out, and could only sullenly return to the room. After she left, Julian ripped off the bed sheets and threw them into the trash can, then turned and threw himself heavily onto the bed. Smelling the familiar scent on the bed, and the familiar furnishings in the room, Julian didn't restrain himself any longer, and cried out in grief. In the dim bedroom, his phone suddenly rang, and Julian, hearing that familiar ringtone, instantly forgot to cry. The next moment, he quickly picked up the phone, and when he saw that the sender was Arya, he cried out in pain while holding the phone, but with a smile on his lips. He wiped his tears and opened the message, but was cast back into hell the moment he saw it. Julian's mind buzzed, filled with disbelief and helplessness. How could Arya know about the child? He remembered that he had ordered the hospital to block all information. Seeing the words "never see each other again" in the message, Julian's heart felt like it was being cut by a dull knife, causing him continuous pain. But as long as Arya was still alive, he was excited and his hands were trembling. He was about to call to ask her where she was, when he suddenly saw the notification above that this was a scheduled message. The fire that had just been ignited in Julian's heart was extinguished again. He wiped his eyes, staring fixedly at those words, until he was finally sure that he had not misread. His heart jumped and endless guilt overwhelmed him. It turned out that he had forced Arya away, that he had caused her to go to the Netherlands overnight. She had known about the child for a long time, But she hadn't said anything, just silently enduring it herself. Julian remembered Arya's several attempts to test him, and now understood that she had actually given him opportunities. If it weren't for him, Arya wouldn't have been on that plane that crashed. Arya. It's all my fault. He felt a pang of pain in his heart, and large tears fell from his eyes. He now knew that he felt more than just guilt towards her. The surging love was about to swallow him whole at this moment. He threw away his phone and howled in pain. He didn't know how long he cried, but Julian finally fell asleep in exhaustion. In his dream, he dreamed that Arya was unharmed, telling him that she had just gone on vacation. He watched her get on the plane with his own eyes, and then the plane crashed before his eyes. Arya. He woke up with a start, the sky was bright, and the room was empty. Julian suddenly came back to his senses, smiled bitterly, and answered the phone that had woken him up. Is this Mr. Julian? I am Ms. Arya's divorce lawyer. I have received the divorce agreement. When are you free to discuss the transfer of property? Hearing the lawyer's words, Julian wondered when they had gotten divorced, then remembered the divorce agreement he had signed that night. He frowned, unable to believe that the divorce agreement was real. Hello. Are you listening? Julian rubbed his brow wearily and replied. 1 hour, I need to see you. An hour later, Attorney Miles arrived at the villa with a pile of documents. Julian was now in a state of exhaustion, his eyes bloodshot. He opened the refrigerator and saw the little cake that Arya had bought, and his eyes reddened again. He turned his head away, his throat rolling as he swallowed the sob. He took a can of beer and sat down dejectedly in front of Attorney Miles. He remembered the property notarization. At that time, he was extremely angry, thinking that Arya had been plotting for so many years only for his money. Now he thought, if she wanted it, he could give her everything, as long as she came back. Mr. Julian, Ms. Arya asked me to handle the property division, giving you her old house and 80,000 yuan in her bank card. She only wants the ring she gave you before you got married, which is equivalent to leaving empty-handed. Do you have any objections? Hearing the lawyer's words, Julian stopped drinking and looked at the lawyer in disbelief. Attorney Miles felt a chill from his gaze, and before he could say anything, the documents were snatched away. Julian read the words on the page, one by one. As he read on, he suddenly laughed, but tears fell in an instant. Tears dripped onto the paper, and Julian could no longer laugh. Why are you so stupid? She had already known about his betrayal, and also knew. Her eyes clearly showed Arya's signature agreeing to the voluntary transfer of property. He couldn't be wrong. Attorney Miles pushed up his glasses, interrupting his emotions. The transfer documents are here, you just need to sign. Miss Arya asked me to collect the ring for her. She will come to pick it up when she has time. Julian was awakened by Attorney Miles' words, and was puzzled. Ring? What ring? Attorney Miles was also stunned, and immediately took out a picture of the style that Arya had given him. Ms. Arya said it looks something like this, with an inscription on the inner circle. Julian saw the photo and his memories instantly returned. He ran into the bedroom, opened the bedside table drawer from memory, and when he saw the box, he felt a sense of familiarity. He took out the box and opened it, only to find that it was empty. Julian thought he had the wrong place and pulled open several drawers, but found no other box. When he pulled the last drawer, he suddenly jolted, turned his head to look out the window, and then collapsed to the floor as if his strength had left him. Julian, what have you done? Ah. He punched his face repeatedly, his mind replaying Arya's soulless gaze out the window that day. So she just wanted her ring back, but what had he done? He didn't listen to a single explanation from her, even blamed her for being petty, and let Caleb throw the ring into the fireplace. The images in Julian's mind became clearer and clearer, finally stopping on Arya's hurt when he pushed her to the ground. Just thinking about these things, Julian felt like his heart was being torn apart. I'm sorry, Arya. Julian pounded his chest, remembering everything from the past, realizing what he had done wrong. For so many years, he had been trapped in the shadow Isabel cast on him, never genuinely caring about Arya. He remembered their wedding night, Arya giving him a sincere confession, saying she had a secret crush on him since middle school, her eyes full of joyful fulfillment at that time. But that day, All he could think about was that Isabel should be relieved now. For 5 years after their marriage, Arya gave up her job, gave up her friends, and wholeheartedly maintained their small family. He thought he had been playing the role of a good husband, but now he realized he had been a bastard. Isabel asked him for a child, and although he refused to get back together, he still gave her his sperm. Arya had known everything for a long time, but she didn't expose it, and still tried her best to maintain his face. But he embarrassed her again and again for Isabel, leaving her isolated and helpless. Arya, I beg you to come back, I love you. Not out of guilt. But now there was no one to jump and skip behind him, calling out Julian again and again. Julian covered his face tightly, unable to look at the room again. Until sunset, Julian was still sobbing. He suddenly remembered Attorney Miles was still sitting in the living room, and hurriedly straightened up and walked out. Good professional ethics allowed Attorney Miles to remain sitting upright, raising an official smile when he saw Julian come out. Julian calmly took the document, blinked his sore eyes, and handed it back. I don't want it. This is Arya's thing. I don't want her to have nowhere to go when she comes back. Attorney Miles nodded as usual, and then asked, what about the ring? Julian's eyes were unfocused, choking as he spoke. Let her come and get it from me herself. Attorney Miles obviously didn't know about Arya's situation, readily agreed and left. As soon as the door closed, a sharp, bright voice woke up the absent-minded Julian. Uncle Julian. But Julian now had no good feelings for Caleb, only feeling that Arya was right. Isabel hadn't taught him well. Caleb also felt the adult's coldness, his eyebrows and eyes filled with caution. Uncle Julian, are you angry with Mom? Can I apologize to you for her? Mom didn't mean to smash Uncle Julian's wedding dress, and she didn't mean to burn Aunt Arya's diary, and she didn't mean to have me throw away the ring. I was the one who told everyone about Aunt Arya peeing her pants at the family banquet. Please don't blame Mom, okay? Caleb thought his honesty would make Julian happy, but as his words fell, Julian froze as if encased in ice, unable to move. He turned to look at Caleb, not daring to blink, and spoke in a hoarse voice. What did you say? Caleb was so frightened by his expression that he didn't dare to speak. Julian's tone became heavier. Tell me, what do you mean by intentionally smashing the wedding dress, intentionally burning the diary, intentionally throwing away the ring, and what about the family banquet? Caleb's mouth suddenly turned down, tears gathering in his eyes. He realized he seemed to have said the wrong thing, but Mom told him that this was his dad, so he still told him the truth. So Arya had been speaking so harshly that day because she had been provoked by Isabel. He had actually seen the shattered wedding photos all over the floor when he got home that day, but he thought Arya was just throwing a tantrum, so he ignored it. But now Caleb was telling him that Isabel had personally smashed and torn them to pieces. He couldn't imagine how sad Arya must have been when she saw the photos she had carefully chosen hundreds of times being smashed. He unconsciously clenched his back teeth, his eyes bloodshot as he looked at Caleb. What else? What about the diary? Arya didn't like to keep a diary. As far as Julian knew, she only had one diary, which she had treasured for more than a decade. It was a memento from her parents. When he flipped through the cabinet just now, he didn't see the notebook that used to be there. He thought she had taken it away. Mom read the diary, said the notebook was rotten. The words inside were blurry, and told me to take it and burn it for fun. Listening to his description, Julian's breath hitched, and he recalled the piece of paper he had knocked off that day. The yellowed paper was clearly that diary, but he hadn't noticed. Julian closed his eyes, his mind full of his words at the time. It's just a burned notebook. I'll buy you 100, 1,000, is that enough? How did Arya respond to him then? She said she was sorry she was wrong. He had forced her into this, but she hadn't done anything wrong at all. He was the one at fault. He slapped his face, as if trying to wake himself up from the past, but now it was all too late. He remembered Arya particularly cherishing that notebook. When she first moved here, she had to sleep with it every night. It was later that he promised, let it go with me here, no one will dare to touch it. But in the end, it was destroyed with his connivance. Julian clenched his back teeth, his mind throbbing with pain. What else? Tell me everything. Caleb trembled in fright, crying as he spoke. The ring in the box. Mom said to throw it away while you weren't paying attention. Wah, and at the family banquet, Mom told me to say loudly that Aunt Arya peed her pants. Julian knew about the ring, and hearing this he clenched his fists even tighter. He remembered leaving for just a moment at the time, and when he came back, Isabel was evasively saying that Arya had been taken away by a man. He angrily chased after her to the dressing room, just in time to bump into the man leaving. Perhaps because the man was good-looking, Julian felt competitive and his anger grew stronger. He didn't want to listen to a single explanation at the time, and thinking about Arya's recent strangeness, he thought he had finally found the reason. But he didn't expect that he had once again hurt her in his self-righteousness. He couldn't help but bend down and look at the ground, trying to suppress the heart-wrenching pain. Tears that had long been worthless now fell in large drops on the floor. He remembered that the expressions on the faces of the people around him were also strange. No one said that Arya was incontinent because no one took her to the bathroom, so she was taken away by the waiter. Julian also recalled the car accident, Arya saving him, resulting in necrosis in her legs. She became disabled to save him, but he made her suffer tremendous humiliation in the Julian family. Arya had always been clean. If her body hadn't really been failing, how could she have allowed herself to become incontinent? When Julian closed his eyes, he could still see the strange gazes of his family when he returned at the time. Now he understood the meaning in them. It was clearly disgust. He couldn't imagine how helpless Arya must have been at the time. He felt desperate just thinking about it now. But he still accused her of cheating, even stabbing her in the back when she was most helpless. Suffocating pain spread throughout Julian's body. Caleb was so infected by the sadness that he stopped crying and just wanted to comfort him. He reached out and put his hand on Julian's back. "Uncle Julian, can you not blame Mom? She just wants me to have a dad." Julian removed his hand, looking at Caleb. There was still some kinship connection, but it could only be that much. He stroked his face. "I won't be your dad. Go back and tell Isabel to put aside this idea." With that, he picked up Caleb and threw him out the door, and changed the door code as well. The house was empty again. Julian dejectedly returned to the bedroom, his eyes fixed on the fireplace. He remembered Arya's coldness when they went to the family banquet that day. He had clearly felt it long ago. Why didn't he ask? If he had asked, would everything have been different? Would Arya not have left him forever? Julian gripped the wall tightly, lowering his head helplessly. Hearing a small crackling sound from the fireplace, Julian raised his head. In that second, he walked to the fireplace like a madman, putting his hand straight in. His eyes were full of obsession. The raging fire burned his hand, but he seemed not to feel it. "Where is it? Where is it?" The veins on Julian's neck bulged. His forehead was covered in sweat, but he still didn't stop, just groping on his own. The pain in his hand reminded him of the wound on Arya's hand before getting in the car that day. So she was in so much pain at the time. Julian searched repeatedly as if he didn't care about his life, and finally found that blackened circle. He was overjoyed, his eyes reddening. The flesh on his hand was sizzling, but he seemed completely unaware, just tightly holding the ring as he slid to the ground. He stared blankly at the window, murmuring pleadingly, "Arya, I found the ring. When are you coming back to get it?" As always, the room was silent. Julian muttered to himself like a madman. "It must be something I didn't do right. That's why you don't want to see me, and wedding photos. Yes, wedding photos." With that, he got up and rummaged through all the trash cans in the house. But the cleaning lady had already cleaned up the trash from the previous 2 days. His lips trembled, unwilling to believe it. He continued to search, even emptying the public trash cans outside the door, but still couldn't find them. He finally realized the wedding photos were gone. Unconsciously walking back home, Julian finally broke down, hugging Arya's spare wheelchair and collapsing onto the floor. "Arya, please come back, I miss you so much." A muffled sob echoed in the room. "Don't they say people have souls after they die? Can you come see me? Even if it's just in a dream." Julian realized for the first time how much he loved Arya. Now his mind was filled with Arya's laughter, her tears, and her mischief. He used to confidently believe that Arya couldn't live without him, but now he realized that he was the one who couldn't live without her. Just thinking about the days ahead, without her presence, caused him excruciating pain. Perhaps he was too tired. He finally had a peaceful sleep that night. When he woke up, he perked up a little, tidied himself up, and went straight to the hospital to find Isabel. Thinking of her as the instigator of all this, Julian's eyes filled with ferocity. He went straight to her office, and after a cursory glance, thinking no one was there, he was about to leave when he heard a voice from the corner. "Give me the money. Otherwise, you'll never see your son again. After all this time, you're still suspicious? Didn't you watch me kill that child with Julian? Don't you know if Caleb is your child?" Julian stopped in his tracks and quickly hid behind the door. Isabel, with her back to him, was no longer the gentle and intellectual woman he knew, but rather a shrew. She had the speakerphone on, and the voice on the other end echoed in the cramped office. "Isabel, don't think I don't know you're a whore who's been with thousands of men. You slept with so many people during that time. Don't think I don't know. Don't use Caleb to threaten me anymore. I'm not falling for it." Perhaps the other party was too firm. Isabel changed her previous tough stance and softened. "Teddy, I just need 50,000. I'm back in the country now." The other side went silent for a moment, asking her to continue. "Remember that guy who confessed to me a few years ago? He still misses me. His family is the richest in the country. When I get him, I'll give you 500,000, let alone 50,000. Teddy didn't believe her, and Isabel quickly explained. "Even if he doesn't accept me, I'm now his mother's attending physician. I told him I studied psychology abroad, and he actually believed it, and directly arranged for me to come to this hospital. If he doesn't want me, can he not want his mother? I have double insurance, don't you believe me?" The two gradually began to chat happily, but Julian was trembling behind the door. Isabel had been lying to him all along. The child wasn't his, but Arya had lost her life because of it. His mother had suffered from severe depression for many years, and she came back saying she had a way to help, but she said she didn't study psychology at all. Julian's vision went dark, unable to believe that he had been played by a woman. The youthful feelings of the past 15 years were all reduced to ashes at this moment. Anger accumulated in his eyes, and with a force he slammed the door shut, scaring Isabel. Seeing it was Julian, Isabel's face turned pale, and she quickly hung up the phone. Her face showed a moment of panic, and she put on a smile. "Julian, what are you doing here?" Julian walked forward and slapped her face without hesitation. "Stop pretending." Isabel's face turned to the side from the blow, and she was afraid to look up, knowing that he must have heard everything. But she couldn't admit it, otherwise there would be no room for maneuver. If that were the case, she owed tens of millions in gambling debts, and no one would help her pay them back. So she forced a smile and pretended to be confused. "Julian, what are you talking about? I don't understand." Seeing that she still didn't admit it, Julian simply didn't waste any more words with her, took out his phone, and played the recording from just now. Hearing her own words coming from inside, Isabel's heart sank to the bottom, and she didn't even know how to smile anymore. "Julian, let me explain, it's not like this." Julian flung her hand away and grabbed her collar. His eyes were filled with anger. "Don't call me Julian anymore. Isabel, you still want to lie to me. I'm warning you, take Caleb and get back. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." He was still thinking about the old kindness of Mr. by saving his mother, and he didn't want to completely cut her off. Isabel was not a Chinese citizen, and what she was doing now was enough to get her deported. But she couldn't leave. If she went back penniless, she would be beaten to death. But she also knew that she would have no more chances with Julian, so after Julian left, she set her sights on his mother. Julian had just slept for a while when he received news from the hospital, and rushed over immediately. Seeing the empty hospital room, Julian's face turned black as coal. "What are you security guards doing? If you can't do it, get out early. What about the surveillance, did you check it?" The director was already sweating profusely, and quickly took Julian to the surveillance room. It turned out that Isabel had secretly transported Mrs. Fu out of the hospital. By the time the nurses found out, she was already gone. Julian ordered them to continue investigating and immediately called Isabel. The phone was hung up, and a text message was sent in the next second. "South City Warehouse, 10 million. Julian cursed angrily and kicked the wall. He asked the driver, Chun, to bring Caleb along and rushed to the South City Warehouse without stopping. He could be played by Isabel once, but he wouldn't be played by her a second time, So he didn't bring any money at all, but directly surrounded the warehouse with people. Isabel really had no experience, and this kidnapping was full of loopholes. Julian saw his mother, who was tied to a chair and unconscious, through the back window, and a wave of panic washed over him. Fire! The bodyguards he brought immediately fired a tranquilizer dart. Isabel was still looking around when she was suddenly hit in the neck, and a bad feeling arose in her heart. Sure enough, the next moment the door was kicked open, and Julian walked in with his people. He first looked at his mother and had her sent back to the hospital. Then he grabbed Isabel from the ground and slapped her angrily. Isabel, I originally wanted to let you go for Mr. Baisake, but you insisted on courting death. You don't want Caleb anymore, do you? Caleb was brought in by the bodyguards, but Isabel didn't even look at him and said coldly, if you want him, you can have him. Hearing Isabel's words, Caleb immediately cried loudly. Julian had not expected that Isabel would abandon even her own child. But after thinking about it, it made sense after all, she only cared about herself. Since that was the case, then he didn't need to make things too easy for her. After ordering people to keep her under guard, Julian returned to the hospital to see his mother. When he arrived at the hospital, he learned what inhuman treatment his mother had been subjected to during this time. Seeing the bruises and purple marks on his mother's body, Julian felt a pang of heartache and tightly grasped her hand. Mrs. Fu had been suffering from insomnia for many years due to depression, but recently she had been able to fall asleep every day. Julian had thought that Isabel's treatment was effective, but he didn't expect that it was because she was giving her electric shocks every day and feeding her sleep aids that were extremely harmful. Seeing all of this, and thinking about Aria's departure, Julian's hatred for Isabel grew deeper. He took his mother home, and decided to find a family doctor for long-term treatment himself. As soon as he settled his mother, he took people to the basement. Isabel had already been sent in. The person on the ground hadn't woken up yet, but Julian couldn't wait. Isabel was awakened by bucket after bucket of ice water. Before she could adjust to the cold water, her hands were pressed into scalding boiling water. The inhuman pain caused Isabel to scream repeatedly. She looked at Julian crying. Julian, I was wrong, please let me go. I'll go back to my country immediately. A red-hot branding iron was imprinted on the back of her hand, and a smell of burnt flesh wafted out. Isabel's hands trembled, her face pale. Julian sat in the chair and watched without any fluctuations. Thinking about Aria being scalded by her viciousness, he only felt that it wasn't enough. Break her legs. If Aria had not been unable to walk freely, how could she have been framed by Isabel to the point of incontinence? Now he would let her taste that feeling too. At his command, the bodyguard raised a club and struck down with force, a scream echoing. Ah, it hurts. I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Isabel was a wretched sight. Her dirty, disheveled hair stuck to her face. Her face was contorted in pain. Saliva streamed uncontrollably, and her whole body was hunched over on the ground. After only 2 blows, the bodyguard stopped, but Isabel felt like she was about to die. The pain in her knees was beyond words. Isabel couldn't even scream. She could only open her mouth and gasp for air. She rolled her eyes several times, almost fainting, but was awakened by the searing pain. She felt like she was no longer a person, but a beast. She squinted at Julian, crawling forward little by little. Julian, don't you love me anymore? That bowl of kanji. The pain made her speak in short, gasping breaths, her heart still praying that Julian would be moved by her words. But at this moment, Julian's face was full of coldness, even moving the chair back a few inches, the disgust in his eyes as if he had seen something filthy. You sent me a bowl of kanji, I helped you immigrate, sent you for further studies, and even gave you a child. Isn't that enough repayment? But how did you treat me? You killed my child and my beloved. Mentioning his beloved, Julian's nose tingled, and his eyes turned red. Isabel sensed the murderous intent in his eyes and cowered. But Julian did not let her off. He stepped forward and grabbed Isabel's neck. Isabel's face quickly turned red, her eyes almost popping out. She clutched at Julian's hand, trying to pry it open, but it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. Julian was truly blinded by anger. He was completely mad at this moment. It was the bodyguard's reminder that brought him back to his senses. Boss, that's enough. Only then did Julian let go of the person in his hands. Isabel was already rolling her eyes. Released, she quickly gasped for air, using her hands to claw her way further away from him. Julian regained his awareness, stood up, looked at the person writhing on the ground, and shook his hand. Watch her, don't let her run away, and don't let her die. In the following days, whenever Julian thought of Arya, he would go and torment Isabel. So he stayed in the basement almost 24 hours a day. Isabel was already extremely weak at this time. Several days without food or water made her dizzy. She had finally tasted the suffering that Arya had endured, and she was filled with remorse. Julian, fully armed, crouched in front of her and took several photos of her current state. Then he took out the photos of Isabel that he had investigated from behind, and held them up in front of her. Tell me, if those socialites you hate the most and those wealthy businessmen you followed knew what you look like now, do you think you can still stay in Canada? Isabel looked at her glamorous self in the photos, as if she was in another world. But hearing Julian's words, she was filled with fear. Those rich girls usually liked to use her as a topic of conversation. If they knew that she had become like this now, then she might as well die. She desperately gathered her hair with her hands, not wanting Julian to photograph her face, looking like a madwoman. Julian looked at her coldly. I'm letting you go now, you better roll back to your country immediately. Isabel, who had finally been granted a pardon, trembled. No, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. She was now a cripple, and going back would not only mean that she would have no money to earn, but she would also be ridiculed. She didn't want to. But Julian was obviously just informing her, ignoring her request, and ordered the bodyguard to throw her onto the street. Having lost the pleasure of tormenting someone, Julian fell into extreme emptiness once again. The airline informed him to attend the victim's funeral tomorrow, but he felt a sense of avoidance. He felt that if he didn't attend, Arya would still exist in this world. Late at night, he hugged the clothes that Arya used to wear, and just as he fell into a beautiful dream with Arya, he was awakened by the ringtone of his mobile phone. Julian, come to the main family compound. Second uncle's voice on the phone was very serious, which made Julian, who was already annoyed by being woken up, even more irritated. Arya didn't like Julian's family, not only because Julian's family didn't like her, but also because of Julian's family's attitude towards Julian. Julian's father died young, and Julian's family had previously expelled his mother from the Julian family. It was not until Julian was born that they brought the mother and son back, but Fu's mother still did not receive a good look and suffered from depression as a result. Julian had always had respect but no intimacy for the Julian family, and although he was unhappy about being called over this time, he did not show it on his face. But when he returned to the Julian family, his dissatisfaction was revealed on his face. Isabel was sitting in a wheelchair, with Caleb standing beside her. Today, she was no longer as weak as she had been in the past few days. Her eyes were full of determination. As soon as Julian stepped into the living room, he was scolded by second uncle. Kneel down. Julian's expression was calm, and he picked a sofa to sit down. Second uncle was so angry at this scene that his face turned livid. You unfilial son. You don't even want your own biological son. Do you want your father's branch to be extinct from now on? Hearing second uncle's words, Julian only found it funny. He is not my son, even if he is, I don't want him. My wife and the mother of my children will only be Arya for the rest of my life. Everyone present looked at each other in disbelief at his words, and looked at Isabel. Isabel was prepared, and second uncle remained unmoved. You're still lying. The proof of sperm donation is here, and the paternity test is written clearly. You still want to deny it. How did the Julian family have a troublemaker like you? Julian no longer had any humorous emotions at this time. He only got up coldly and heavily. He had respected the Julian family for so many years, he couldn't believe that they would trust an outsider instead of him. Then he had nothing to say. Julian stood up straight away. If you want him, then he can be your grandson. I know better than you whether he is my son or not. Seeing his firm denial, the Julian family also became suspicious. At this time Caleb ran to Julian's feet, crying and wailing. My mother is lying, my father is not Uncle Julian. These words caused an uproar, and Isabel's hand on her leg began to tremble. Caleb! Come back. Caleb shuddered and closed his mouth, retreating back to her side. Second uncle also became suspicious at this time and stared at Isabel. Isabel, I believe you, but let's do a paternity test in front of me, so that everyone will be convinced. Isabel's face was pale, but she still nodded. Second uncle immediately called the family doctor, but Julian turned and left. A sudden change occurred, and Caleb's cries were earth-shattering. Isabel was now holding a knife against his neck. Give me 10 million. Otherwise I'll kill the Julian family's grandson. The paternity test is here. Why don't you believe it? She was completely crazy at this time, and Caleb's neck was already bleeding. Seeing that the scene was silent, Isabel thought she was about to succeed, but in the next second, she was knocked to the ground. The people of the Julian family had seen a lot of the world, and had long been able to deal with this kind of thing with ease. The moment Isabel fell to the ground, a piercing pain came, and she suddenly laughed. Julian, since you don't love me anymore, why did you come to pick me up and favor me? It's all your fault that I'm like this now. You won't have a good death. In her curses, Julian sent her to prison and she was sent back to Canada. As for Caleb, Julian planned to send him to an orphanage, but a childless couple from the Julian family voluntarily adopted him. This farce started in the late night and ended in the early morning. Julian didn't sleep all night and went to the victim's funeral. There were no coffins on site, only a wall of names. Countless relatives of the victims cried uncontrollably, regardless of face and dignity. Julian stood among them like an alien. His face was expressionless, as if he was just there for a visit. But on closer inspection, one would find that his hand in his pocket was trembling uncontrollably, and his eyes were bloodshot and unblinking. Before the end of the ceremony, he left the scene first. But as soon as he walked out the door, he couldn't help but cough, a vibration in his chest, and a mouthful of thick blood spurted out of his mouth, falling directly to the ground. But Julian didn't even look at it, wiped his lips, got up, and walked out with a straight back. Until he got into the car, his throat was full of the taste of iron. Julian slumped weakly on the steering wheel, looking as if he was dead. After a long time, he started the car and crashed hard into the electric pole next to him. The moment he passed out, he seemed to see Arya coming to pick him up. 3 years later. Mr. Julian, I have booked a 10 o'clock flight tonight. Would you like to go home? The new assistant, Lou, didn't know he had already touched Mr. Julian's taboo. That is, everything related to Holland should not be mentioned in front of Mr. Julian. Listening to the assistant's words, Julian rubbed his brow and stared blankly out the window. Holland, he hadn't heard of that place in a long time. It felt like a lifetime ago. The car accident didn't let Julian leave as he wished. It only turned him into a cripple. From then on, he became a different person, a work machine. 365 days a year, he never rested. His net worth had multiplied several times, but he still lived in the old, dilapidated apartment in the urban village. Lost in thought, the car had already arrived at his door. Julian tapped his fingers on his knee. Go straight to the airport. Coincidentally, this flight was the same one Arya had the accident on. Julian closed his eyes and lay back in his seat. The world outside the window was pitch black. He even thought inappropriately, what if things happened again? That way he could die in the same grave as Arya. But things didn't go as he wished. He had just dreamed of his first meeting with Arya when the plane arrived. The assistant was somewhat surprised to see Mr. Julian's bewildered expression. He thought Mr. Julian was always cold. Through the car window, Julian also saw his exposed emotions. He quickly composed himself and got out of the cabin calmly. Stepping onto Dutch soil, he felt a trace of fear and expectation. In the past 3 years, he had gradually accepted the fact that Arya was gone, but now that he was in Holland, he began to deceive himself. Arya was actually still alive. They were just separated for a few years, and he was here to see her now. The autumn wind blew. Julian's eyes red the moment he stepped onto the ground. He lowered his head and walked quickly. Haley! Suddenly, a voice rang out in the quiet crowd. Julian stopped abruptly, his eyeballs trembling violently. His eyebrows furrowed, and he looked towards the source of the sound with caution and a hint of anticipation. But the crowd was crowded, and he couldn't find anything. In that instant, his heart turned cold, and a self-deprecating smile appeared on the corner of his lips. Julian turned his gaze back and raised his foot to continue walking, but was swept by a gust of wind coming towards him. He quickly dodged, but the next second he froze in place. Why are you wearing so little again? Do you believe I'll tell your uncle to beat you up? Oh, it's called fashion, what do you know? In the crowded hall, the two people in front of Julian were joking with each other as if no one else was around. At this moment, Julian stood up straight, took his hands out of his pockets, and stood woodenly in place, not even daring to blink. The person he had dreamed of for the past few years was right in front of him. He was afraid that if he blinked, she would disappear again. So Julian forced himself not to move until tears streamed down his face, but the two people in front of him raised their feet and walked forward. Julian immediately regained his senses and quickly caught up with the people in front. His eyes were full of anxiety, and he almost slipped several times. Aria. After only a few steps, just like he had dreamed many times, he grabbed her wrist. But this time, Aria didn't disappear as soon as he grabbed her. He firmly held the warm flesh in his hand. Looking at the person who was still there, Julian's breathing almost stopped, his eyes full of disbelief. Aria turned her head in confusion, and before she could see who it was, she was pulled into someone's embrace. She was about to struggle when a familiar scent filled her nose, and her raised hand froze in the air. Julian used all his strength, as if he wanted to rub her into his body. Aria, is it really you? I miss you so much, he asked cautiously. Aria felt a stream of heat flowing into her neck. She shuddered and wanted to push him away. Julian was afraid it was a dream and didn't dare to let go at all. Instead, he hugged her tighter. Haley, who had been watching with her arms folded, finally reached out and forcefully pried Julian's hand away. Pervert! Let go of my aunt. Aria also put her hand on his chest and pushed him away with force. Julian's embrace was empty. He lowered his head and sniffed, then slapped himself twice. When he looked up again, he realized he really wasn't dreaming. The joy of being reunited after loss filled his heart. His hands and feet trembled uncontrollably, and even his eyelashes were covered with water droplets. Am I dreaming, Aria? You're really still alive. Uncle, are you being silly from being on the plane? We've already gotten off the plane. Wake up. Before Aria could speak, Haley tiptoed and shouted loudly in Julian's ear. Julian was completely awakened by the shout. He took a deep look at Aria and then couldn't wait to hold her hand. Aria quickly dodged, and Haley stood in front of her. What are you doing? You're not allowed to hit on my aunt. Julian helplessly withdrew his hand. Hearing the words in her sentence, he raised an eyebrow. Aunt. Haley raised her neck. Yes. Julian looked at Aria. Aria had already changed from her initial surprise to calmness. Julian, you. Before she could finish speaking, Haley's loud voice rang out again. Uncle. Hearing this address, Julian felt an ominous premonition rising in his heart. Aria also immediately turned her head and put on a sweet smile. Why did you come in? Roman put away the keys in his hand and touched her head. I waited for you for a long time and you didn't come out, so I had to come find you myself. Seeing the scene in front of him, Julian's initial joy was instantly doused with a basin of cold water. Roman looked at the person in front of Aria and asked suspiciously, This is? Aria did not introduce Julian to him, but took Roman's hand and opened her mouth to Julian. Julian, this is my love. With one sentence, Julian instantly lost his ability to think. He opened his mouth in disbelief. Love? Aria nodded calmly, and then turned and walked away without waiting for him to reply. Julian looked at the disappearing figure, and his heart ached for no reason. His mind was full of how could this be? He hadn't recovered from the joy of Aria being alive, but was thrown back into hell. He didn't have time to think. He raised his foot and wanted to follow the people in front. He had so much to say. But as soon as he looked up, he found that the three people had disappeared without a trace. At this time, the assistant was no longer invisible, putting away his gossipy eyes and dutifully asking, Mr. Julian, the car is already outside. Are we leaving now? Julian rubbed his temples. Not knowing what he was thinking, the wounded look in his eyes just now instantly turned gloomy and determined. I need all the information of those three people just now. I'll give you 1 day. Send it to my email. After speaking, he strode out of the airport. After waiting for a day, Julian finally received the information he wanted. But he didn't expect that other than Aria, The information of the other two people only had their names and ages. Looking at Roman's photo, Julian's eyes gradually darkened. The next second, he got up and went to Aria's current address. He waited at the door for a day, and finally waited for Aria to come back. He immediately pushed the door open and got out of the car, took a few steps forward and grabbed Aria's arm. "Aria, let's talk." Aria was caught off guard and pulled, her steps staggered, and her eyes looking at Julian were filled with a bit of annoyance. Julian didn't notice, because he couldn't think of anything else as long as he saw Aria's face. His longing for Aria almost exceeded his own imagination. Aria struggled several times to no avail, and still got into his car. The air was silent for a while. Julian opened his mouth. "Your legs." Aria stared out the window indifferently, her tone flat and unwavering. "They're fine." Aria's legs were only temporarily necrotic. She received timely treatment when she came to Holland, and now they were no different from ordinary people. Julian belatedly noticed Aria's attitude, and felt even more uneasy in his heart. I thought you were on that plane, these 3 years. Have you been doing well? I miss you so much every day, every hour, every moment I miss you. I tore up the divorce agreement, it doesn't count." Aria listened quietly, and was also grateful that she hadn't boarded that plane in the first place. If she hadn't been humiliated that day and passed out in the car, and soon had a high fever, maybe she would have died in that accident. These 3 years she has been doing very well in Holland. She has her own family, career and love. She doesn't want to look back. So what? Julian knew he was terribly wrong, but Aria's indifference still made his heart ache. "The child isn't mine, I just found out. What I feel for you isn't guilt, it's love, Aria. Can you give me one more chance? This time let me pursue you." Julian's words were full of flattery. If it were the past, Aria would have been melted already, but Aria had already lost all affection for him. "I have someone I love. Please respect yourself." With that, she pushed the door open and got out of the car. Julian's hand, reaching out to hold her back, froze in midair. He chuckled bitterly, clenching his empty fist. He wiped his nose, his eyes red as he watched Aria walk away. In the following days, Julian abandoned all his work and waited in front of Aria's door every day. He sent her a bouquet of flowers and a letter every day, hoping to use past memories to rekindle Aria's love. Roman hadn't appeared beside Aria for these past few days, giving Julian some confidence. Aria must still be angry with him, so she randomly found a man as a shield. But today Julian waited until late at night and Aria still hadn't returned. He immediately called his assistant and tracked her location to a nightclub. The nightclub was dimly lit, and couples were kissing passionately, lost in their own worlds. Seeing this scene, Julian's worry for Aria intensified. He carefully scanned every booth but couldn't find Aria. Just as he was becoming anxious, he heard the sound of a glass bottle breaking behind him, followed by a commotion that drowned out the deafening music. Julian turned to glance at it, wanting to continue searching, but his eyes suddenly caught a familiar figure. Julian froze immediately. His brain hadn't even reacted yet, but his legs were already running in that direction. Aria was standing in the middle of the group of troublemakers, arguing with a foreigner, with a crying little girl standing beside her. Julian rushed forward, pulled Aria behind him, and calmly negotiated with the foreigner. But the foreigner was clearly enraged and wouldn't listen to Julian's reasoning. Julian quickly turned back and told Aria to leave first. He would stay and handle it. Aria didn't hesitate. She took the little girl and went out the door, but as soon as she reached the entrance, she felt a gust of wind behind her. The next second, she heard a dull thud of a bottle breaking behind her, and she quickly turned around. Julian was facing away from her, his body shuddered. The bottle in the foreigner's hand had shattered. Aria's heart tightened. Julian's face, which had been tense, broke into a smile when he heard Aria's worried call. So when the foreigner picked up another piece of the broken bottle, and was about to strike again, Julian calmly grabbed his hand and kicked him in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The police arrived quickly, and Julian breathed a sigh of relief and passed out. When he woke up, he was in the hospital, his head wrapped in bandages. He opened his eyes and looked around expectantly, but didn't see the person he wanted to see. His eyes filled with disappointment, and he propped himself up and asked the little girl by the bed, "Where's Aria?" Lily looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She seemed quite frightened. Teacher Arya went home first. If you need anything, you can tell me. Hearing her call her teacher Arya, Julian guessed that she and Arya were close. He was silent for a long time before speaking. You call her teacher Arya, what does she teach you? Lily replied obediently, painting. Teacher Arya is very good. Hearing her words, Julian was momentarily stunned. He had forgotten that Arya studied art in college. The guilt that had been dormant surged up again. He swallowed hard and asked the question he most wanted to ask, but was also most afraid of. Have you ever met your teacher Arya's boyfriend? As soon as he said this, Lily tilted her head in confusion. Teacher Arya doesn't have a boyfriend. She's been single for a long time. Julian's eyes, which had been looking out the window out of fear, now flickered with an almost imperceptible joy. And he turned to look at Lily. Are you telling the truth? Lily nodded obediently as always. Her nod swept away Julian's previous disappointment. He was so excited that his lips were trembling. Thank you. Lily didn't know what he was thanking her for, but he was injured saving her and teacher Arya, so as long as he was happy. Confirming that Arya was really lying to him, Julian was overjoyed. His love for Arya was almost overflowing. He waited all day for Arya to come, but he wasn't sad. He just quietly planned in his heart. On the day Julian was discharged from the hospital, Arya finally came. Seeing Arya, Julian felt like even his wound didn't hurt anymore. He feigned weakness and leaned into Arya's arms, but Arya moved away without a trace. Julian shook his head helplessly. She was still angry, but it didn't matter. She would soon understand her own feelings. Arya originally wanted to send him to the car and go home, but Julian said he wanted to have a meal with her. Arya opened her mouth to refuse, but Julian spoke first, using his injury as a semi-coercive tactic. Arya glanced at Lily beside her and finally nodded. On the way to the restaurant, Arya remained silent throughout, with only Lily occasionally chatting. She took out her phone and messaged Roman, saying she would be home later. Arya thought that she could leave after a meal, but she didn't expect the restaurant to be strangely empty on the way there. Logically, that shouldn't be the case. Arya thought that there might be fewer people on a weekday, and didn't think too much about it. Until she walked around a corner to the plaza, every person who passed her handed her a rose. She had a vague feeling about what was going on. Lily and Julian, who had said they were going to the restroom, hadn't returned. She stood there, with more and more flowers in her hands, and more people in the plaza. Arya was annoyed and wanted to throw the flowers directly into the trash can. Just as she looked up to find a trash can, the large screen in the plaza lit up with a flash. She heard her own voice inside. Julian, I love you so much. Julian, happy wedding. Julian. Every sentence about Julian was said by her in the past. Those days were so distant that they seemed like a past life. The video played snippets of her past, making Arya's nose tingle with bitterness. Suddenly the screen went dark, then lit up again the next second. This time it was Julian's voice. Arya, I love you so much. Arya, I'm so lucky to have met you again. I owe you the past 30 years. Can I use the rest of my life to make it up to you? The flowers in Arya's hand suddenly slipped to the ground. She lowered her head, uninterested in the large screen. Her phone rang repeatedly, and she took it out to see that her WeChat moments were exploding. Julian had spent a lot of money to broadcast the video on screens all over the city. Everyone was watching this grand declaration of love. But Arya felt a surge of anger, her heart sinking to freezing point. Finally, the large screen stopped on Julian's sentence. Arya, I love you. Can you forgive me? The crowd around her started to chant, weakly at first, but then louder, urging her to forgive him. The crowd moved closer and closer, finally opening up a path in front of Arya. The man who said he was going to the restroom, now wearing a white tuxedo and holding a bouquet of everlasting roses, walked towards Arya with shining eyes. Arya watched everything indifferently, feeling no sense of involvement. Julian knelt on one knee, raised the ring box in his other hand, and opened it. Arya, I got the ring back. Can you give me another chance? The familiar ring box contained the restored plain band, only it looked much smaller than before. If you looked closely, you could even see the traces of burning on the band. Seeing the ring, Arya widened her eyes in surprise. Seeing her subtle change, Julian pressed his advantage. You don't need to give me an answer right now. You just need to give me a chance and I'll do the rest. You just have to watch. The crowd started chanting again. Give him a chance. Give him a chance. The noise made Arya feel like she was being roasted on a fire, and she felt annoyed. She quietly looked around at everyone, then lowered her head and asked Julian, "Can everything that's happening now be broadcast on screens all over the city?" Julian thought that Arya was finally going to forgive him, and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. In the next instant, the two of them were being broadcast live on the large screen. Arya nodded in satisfaction. Julian's lips curled up, and his confidence doubled. "Come back to the country with me, Arya." Arya looked at him calmly, and reached for the ring box. Julian quickly and eagerly moved it closer to her. But unexpectedly, Arya raised her hand and knocked the ring to the ground. Julian's face changed instantly, and before he could pick it up, the flowers in his hand were taken away. Arya sniffed the flowers and then threw them on the ground, stomping them to pieces. "Julian, it's enough to make the same mistake once. The hurt that you and Isabel caused me can't be erased by time. If all of this today was your purpose for saving me that day, then I would rather it had been me in the hospital. Your moral kidnapping is really shameless." Julian's heart sank with Arya's words and he stood up. Arya continued, "I don't want your love, and I don't want to give you my love either. Do I have to repeat it? I don't love you anymore." Julian asked anxiously, his voice choked with emotion. "If you don't love me, why did you hire someone to pretend to be your lover to make me jealous? If you don't love me, why do you still feel sorry for me when I get hurt?" Arya was speechless, too lazy to even explain. Her eyes only filled with indifference. Julian panicked, grabbing her hand. "Are you still angry with me? It doesn't matter. I'll show you that I've changed. Don't say such things, I beg you, Arya." Arya forcefully pulled her hand away, said nothing, and turned to leave. The crowd tried to stop her, and her face darkened completely. "Get out of the way." Arya knew that this was how things would turn out. She wouldn't have secretly married him if she had known it would cause so much trouble. Roman was the man who carried Arya out of the family banquet back then. She didn't expect that she would meet him, her first acquaintance in the Netherlands, so coincidentally. He had seen her at her most embarrassing moment, and Arya, being thin-skinned, had avoided him many times. Later, Roman found the best doctor to treat her legs, and she lowered her guard a little. After letting down her guard, she realized that Roman was really good. Roman was a few years older than her, cold on the outside but warm on the inside, and his care for her was meticulous. She belatedly realized that Roman had actually been pursuing her all along, and there weren't so many grievances between them. But Arya had never accepted his pursuit because she was disabled and didn't want to be a burden to anyone. Julian made her afraid to encounter love again, but this time was really different. Roman kept all his promises, and even her aunt admired him very much. So after Arya's legs recovered, she turned around and proposed to Roman. Arya secretly married him just to avoid a lot of trouble, because Roman's identity was very special. But she didn't expect to cause even bigger trouble for herself. As soon as she got home, Roman was waiting for her at the door, a smile playing on his lips. Arya felt a pang of guilt. He must have found out about what happened earlier. She was about to say something to distract him when she was suddenly embraced tightly around the waist. Roman buried his face in her neck. "You've made something of yourself. You're a movie star now. Are you going to kick me, your old husband, to the curb next?" Arya was amused by his words. "What are you talking about? You're so handsome. How could I bear to kick you to the curb?" Roman continued to tease her. "So I have to share a wife with that guy?" Arya's guilt dissipated in Roman's joke. She kissed him to show her comfort and didn't mention the matter again. "Why did you come home so early today?" Roman stopped teasing her and touched her head. "There's an auction tomorrow, and the painting you wanted is there. I couldn't wait to come back and tell you. Do you want to go with me?" Arya wanted a painting by a very niche artist. The artist only had 2 paintings in total, and they particularly suited her taste. She had obtained one of them by accident many years ago, but it had never appeared on the market since. Now that the artist was active again, she had to go no matter what. She arrived a little late, but just in time for the painting to be exhibited. The starting price wasn't high, and Arya was about to raise her paddle when someone else did it faster. 200,000. 200,000. It was just a not-so-famous painting, and the whole place was shocked. Everyone looked around for the sucker. Arya also saw Julian 2 aisles away from her, and her lips pressed together. Roman also saw the man, and his eyes instantly turned sharp. With a bid of 200,000, naturally no one would raise the price again. Just when everyone thought it was about to be hammered down, the auctioneer stopped hammering. The crowd looked in the direction of the auctioneer's hand, and saw a handsome man making a gesture of snatching, and casually waving it in front of his eyes. This meant sky-high price. Julian also looked over and was overjoyed when he saw Arya. He had come specifically for this painting today, because he knew Arya liked this artist. He was convinced that Arya was just still angry, and he wanted to use this painting to apologize for what happened yesterday. But he didn't expect to meet Arya here. But when he saw the man next to Arya, he frowned. The ring on that man's hand was conspicuous, making his heart flutter with panic. Since a sky-high price had been bid, Julian didn't need to compete any further. He had originally intended to give it to Arya anyway. After the auction ended, he immediately walked towards Arya. Seeing this, Roman pulled Arya into his arms, and Julian froze in place. He saw the ring on Arya's hand that matched the one on Roman's, and his steps faltered. Arya, I was too reckless yesterday. I originally wanted to bid for this painting for you. I remember you liked this artist very much. He needed to change the subject quickly, to avoid thinking about the rings. But Roman didn't give him the chance. I will get whatever my wife wants for her, so I don't need you to bother. The word wife made Julian's mind explode. He was still clinging to the hope that Arya was acting. Until Arya took out a red booklet from her bag. I specifically brought my marriage certificate today, just in case you think I'm lying to you again. Do you have anything else to say? Julian was speechless. The glaring red stained his eyes red too. She was really married. His self-deception was finally exposed. Roman was wondering what she brought that for when they left the house. Now he knew her purpose. He smiled adoringly, put his arm around her, and walked out. After taking only 2 steps, Julian suddenly rushed forward, grabbed his shoulder and punched Roman. Arya's eyes widened. What are you doing? Julian pointed at Roman on the ground. Tell me, what tricks did you use to trick Arya into marrying you? If you don't tell me, I'll kill you. Roman wiped his mouth, stood up nimbly, and retaliated without hesitation. The two of them wrestled on the ground, and no matter how Arya tried to persuade them, it was no use. Julian was no match for Roman, and was beaten without any ability to fight back. Only then did Roman get up and gently touch Arya's face. It's okay, let's go. Julian lay on the ground, his brain blank. His heart ached faintly. Watching the departing figures, tears streamed down his face like broken beads. Arya really didn't love him anymore. He was a complete failure. He returned to the hotel like a dead man, and saw a box at the hotel entrance. He opened it and found the letters and flowers he had sent to Arya. The flowers had withered, and the letters had been opened. He opened them, and was about to throw them away when he saw other words at the end, and immediately stopped. Then he opened each letter, and found that Arya had written a few lines of reply at the end of each one. She repeatedly said that she didn't love him, and told him to let her go. Julian quickly finished reading, covered the letters with his hands, and sat on the ground crying bitterly. He really made a mistake from the beginning. A mistake in involving Arya in his selfish desires, causing her to have to spend a lifetime healing. He cried at the door until he was about to faint, and was finally taken into the room by his assistant. His emotions gradually calmed down, and he finally let go of his obsession with Arya, but he couldn't let go of love. So he picked up his pen, and wrote a final letter to Arya. Arya received that letter when she found out she was pregnant. Seeing the familiar envelope, she immediately stopped smiling, but she didn't expect that this time the letter only had 1 sentence. Arya, I will never come to the Netherlands again in this lifetime. I don't know how to love someone, but as long as you need it, I will be your safety net for the rest of your life. I'm sorry. Roman glanced at it from behind her and clicked his tongue in disapproval, took the paper unceremoniously, tore it up, and threw it in the trash. Seeing tears in Arya's eyes, he felt a pang of distress. You can go back to him, don't worry about me, As long as you're happy. Arya immediately pouted, and tears were about to fall. Roman, will you love me forever? Roman was stunned. He didn't expect her to ask that. But he still gently wiped away her tears, his eyes filled with utmost sincerity. I will.